Stars
Podcast. This is the
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
Indeed, this is the Five Starr Wrestling Report podcast, and you are tuned into the Monday edition of our weekly Monday Friday wrestling show here on YouTube and Rumble. If you're a returning viewer, welcome back, and thanks again for stopping in. If you are new to the show, welcome aboard. Make sure you subscribe, make sure that notification bell is turned on so that you receive updates on when our shows go up each week. And most importantly of all, help us out in the algorithms by smashing the like button and leaving a comment down below on the content we discussed today. The normal Monday show is our weekly discussion on AEW Rampage, NWA Power, subsequent pay-per-view and weekend events, and wrestling article discussions. I write weekly article content for the Chairshot website, which you can check out by going over to www.chairshot.com. If you click under the opinion tab, you will find my work labeled under the name Star. Or you can always check the description box where I'll leave a link for my most recent publication. As you can tell by the title of today's podcast, we do not have an article discussion included for today's show. And that is because my article that I submitted over the weekend is still an editing process. Normally, I write my content early in the week in preparation for the following week's show, where we sit down and discuss my content after having it published and out for the viewing experience for several days. And unfortunately, I got way behind on my schedule this week, did not get a chance to actually sit down and write my article in full and actually get it submitted until Sunday afternoon. So when I went back to check and see the progress of where we were in the article submission process, it was still in editing mode. So I presume it'll be out within the next couple days, and albeit I could just discuss the article before it's had a chance to be publicly shared, but I'd rather wait and hold off on it until it goes through the normal process, just by some off chance that they need me to go in and change a few things beforehand. Either way, we will wait until next Monday for the article discussion, which means that I probably won't write anything this week, and we'll just have a bye week of news columns so we can just focus on the wrestling reporting. Which is what y'all came to see, right? To hear me bitch and moan about AEW for 20 plus minutes. And actually, to be fair, I wouldn't even say that the AEW show from Friday was the show that got me up in arms by the end. The NWA pay-per-view was actually more frustrating on the surface. If anything, simply based on the fact that it was a pay-per-view that I actually had to pay money to watch on replay, the AEW show was merely boring and unexciting. Still coming with its problems, of course, but it left me nowhere near as frustrated as the NWA pay-per-view from Saturday night. But let us get into these shows just to see where exactly my faults lie with both programs. Beginning, of course, with AEW Rampage from December 3rd, 2021. And one thing I wrote down from the beginning of the show here, not that we're technically supposed to know since we're led to believe that this is a live show, but since we're already kind of aware of the fact that they tape all the Rampage matches after Dynamite, I thought this was amusing, so I wrote it down. They follow a Cody Andrade street fight, where the lasting image is Cody rolling around the ring with his arm on fire. They go from that to a Tony Nese match. Laughable. And the opener was Tony Nese and Sammy Guevara for the TNT Championship. Apparently, Tony already has a 4-0 record, despite having not had one single televised match up until this point. Would have been nice if we got to see some of those wins prior to this match in some kind of pre-tape or something. And I'm also still not convinced that Tony is not a genetic mutation of Jay White and Trent Beretta. Anyway, I'm trying to think of the most constructive but honest way to describe this match. They did a million moves. Some of it looked all right. Some of it looked kind of sloppy. It actually reminded me of one of those early 2000 TNA X Division matches, like where you pretty much chalk everything up to they did a bunch of stuff. And when it was all over, you wouldn't remember a god-blessed thing that happened in the match. And I know that kind of sounds like I'm shitting on it, but am I wrong in my critique? Could anyone recall a single thing that happened in this match without going back and watching? I remember the finish, but that's about it. It was an old school flashy cruiserweight match from WCW in the late 90s where they did a bunch of spots. There was virtually no heat for any of it. And then there was a winner. Not that I expected Tony to win the strap here, but I mean, I didn't get a whole lot out of it. I think Sammy's match with Jay Lethal was a much better title match because at least that was a match that did something to elevate the profile of Sammy in some meaningful manner. Yeah, I really have nothing else to say about this one. Tony's a jag. Sammy's title reign has been completely lousy. And they had a match, and Sammy won. It was a thing that happened that you won't remember a month from now. Following that, we had another Christian Cage Jurassic Express pre-tape where Christian once again surreptitiously implied that he's turning heel, which, I mean, at this point, I wouldn't be all that opposed to. But you can see that coming a mile away. Jade Cargill had a squash against someone that may or may not have been a woman. And by the time I could figure it out, Jade had already won and was well into the post-match beatdown. I did get a chuckle out of the deal with Thunder Rosa dropping the headset to make the save, and right as she's leaving, Ricky Starks goes, "Why does everyone do that?" Nothing ever gets past Ricky on this show. And, you know, by the way, not to spend more time than necessary to dwell on it, but there was just no heat for this afterbirth attack. It was another pointless post-match beatdown that really probably did not need to happen. And Jade still sucks. We got, directly as my notes read, Adam Cole doing a promo while the Elite attempted to act out a promo and utterly failed. And yes, they are indeed doing a six-man with them and the Best Friends, which will probably be about as horrible as you're expecting it to be. There's 6 guys in there, 3 of whom are comedy schmucks with low-rent looks, and the other 2 are the Beta Bucks. So unless Adam Cole is able to perform at God mode active level for one night, I'm really not giving my hopes up for anything good there. That said, there was one genuinely hysterical line in this entire promo, and it is when Nick Jackson said, and I quote here, "We're tough guys." I cannot even begin to describe to you how hard I howled at that line. Kyle O'Reilly cannot debut on the show soon enough. And as we pretty much barrel right through the rest of this show, that brings us to the main event. It is FTR taking on Pack and Pentagon. And while I certainly will not complain about Pac taking the place of Rey Fenix, especially in a tag team setting, you still had Pentagon in there bound to fuck things up at some point. And actually, if we're being fair here, Penta was actually more tolerable to watch here than usual, so I'll take what I can get. The match was not bad. You know, like one of the running themes they had play throughout the match was Pac being off his game with some of his offense because he's selling the bad eye, which off his game. I mean, with AEW, it's so hard to tell if guys inadvertently are botching moves or if they're outright like attempting to fuck something up. I mean, with Pac, he's at least talented enough where I'd be able to buy that some of the sloppiness with him in this match was him just selling. The only real notable part of the story that came into play with that, though, was the spot later on where Pac tried to go for the springboard leap onto FTR, but he tripped on the top rope and rolled through so the heels could immediately take advantage. I mean, and like I said, whether or not it was an actually planned spot, I mean, it was a fortuitous heat transition as they went to the break. I rolled my eyes at the spot where Cash tried to get the illegal cover on Pac while Rick Knox was admonishing the heels for not tagging out. To which my response was, oh, so now the AEW officials give a fuck about enforcing rules? How convenient that it only comes up in a storyline context. That said, it is AEW we're talking about here, so it would not be fitting for a tag match on the show if we didn't have 1,100 things going down at a given time. And excluding the usual four-man breakdown, they tried to get Tully involved at various points toward the end, which really is not a good idea in my opinion. I mean, the guy's not going to be able to take a believable-looking bump at his age anyway without hurting himself, so I mean, I don't even know why they're bothering even going down this road. It just seems like an accident waiting to happen at this point. It's the same stuff I bitch about them doing with Arn, too. You know, and after just seeing Arn do that thing where he accidentally fell off the stage during that Cody Andrade street fight, it's like, the Tully thing just kind of set me off. I probably could have done without the 88 false finishes, too, you know, especially factoring in that it really killed the crowd by the end. But the main finish here was Pac doing a moonsault to FTR on the outside, and as he tosses Dax back in, Dax takes the ref and starts feigning a knee injury. And that allows for Malachi to come up from behind and missed Pac in the other eye. Although from first glance, I wasn't fully convinced that Malachi wasn't going to lay in a wet one on Pac's lips. I don't judge, man. You do you. And that lame angle allowed for Dax to roll up Pac and pin him. You know, because God forbid FTR do something dastardly themselves to beat Pac and get some heat. No, instead, they need Malachi Black to do their dirty bidding for them. And in a very apropos way to end the show, and because Excalibur is the worst commentator in professional wrestling today, bar none, here is the extent to his closing thoughts. As Black goes to gouge Pac's eye, he goes, "Oh my," and Pac's blood is on Malachi's hand. Malachi's ominous and dark side grows with each passing week. Oh, well, we're out of time, folks. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you Wednesday. And I honestly may have put more effort into that quote than Excalibur did. Hopefully Pac's eye has not been ripped from its retina. God, Excalibur fucking sucks at his job. Look, I get we're coming up on the holidays. And, you know, people usually do a lot of traveling around this time of year. They spend time with family. They aren't really honed into watching television. I get it. But I think there's something to be said about the story of the Dynamite viewership from this past Wednesday being worse than the Thanksgiving show, which we already knew going in was going to be pretty bad. But those Dynamite numbers were the worst they've done since May. And it could be coincidental, who knows. Again, the holiday season is always fuzzy around this time of year of wrestling. But that show sucked. And it was clear by the midway point of that show that they kind of phoned it in. It was just a lifeless show with not a whole lot going on. But here's the other thing you have to think about. On that Dynamite show, where they did that dreadful number, they had Bryan Danielson work a match and CM Punk work a match back-to-back in the first hour. And I've already been saying for a while now how the nostalgia is eventually going to wear off with those two. Just the nature of the business we live in now. And they've already featured Punk and Danielson pretty substantially on television over the past couple months. Arguably a little too much given their status. Is that nostalgia already wearing off? Wouldn't be all that surprising to me. I mean, and we already know AEW has a lot of trouble generating a good portion of their Dynamite audience to tune into the Rampage show live. I mean, Rampage ratings have been pretty stagnant and steadily dropping for a while now. I mean, that show where they did the 1.2 or whatever with the CM Punk debut, I mean, that was a peak. And ever since then, it's just been a slow drop. And, I mean, having watched this show, I'm not expecting anything different this week. I wouldn't be surprised if it's worse. I don't know what's going on with AEW right now, but, I mean, this is like the third or fourth show in a row that really just hasn't been all that impressive. Just a few weeks ago, heading into that Full Gear pay-per-view, I thought AEW was running some of its better programming from the entire year. But for whatever reason, these shows leading into that Winter is Coming special have been extraordinarily lackluster. And again, could be the holiday season, but I don't know. Could be either trying to find their footing as they're figuring out where they want to go creatively for the next year in their top programs, but whatever the issue is right now, it's making it really hard for me to get invested into these shows. And again, that's not to say that there isn't stuff on the show that I have been enjoying. The Hangman Page Danielson title match should be good. The build-up for it is boring as fuck, but I mean, I am looking forward to the title match. And, the Punk MJF stuff has been good. But, that's also something that maybe they don't want to pay off right now and they're saving it for early 2022, which I'm all for. But they need to be careful they don't overplay their hand with the constant back and forth promo exchanges every week, because that can get old real fast. So, we'll see where things land on Wednesday, but this Rampage show, despite the fact it was only an hour, left a lot to be desired. I guess, in fact, you could say that AEW Rampage was hard times, if you will. Yeah, I know, that wasn't good at all. My bad. But that brings us to NWA Hard Times from December 4th. And honestly, what can you say about this show? This was a very mixed bag of a lot of different things. I actually had a lot of trouble collecting my overall thoughts on it by the end, but after having watched the finish to the main event and the way the show went off air, I actually think I found a very apt analogy for how I felt about the show. This was a combination of a mid-2000s TNA pay-per-view with some traditional NWA elements sprinkled in. And by that, I mean there was some really good wrestling on the undercard toward the beginning, and as we progressed up the card to the more featured content, the match quality started to exponentially dip, especially with the last two matches. And the main event was one of those Russo clusterfuck segments where there's a million different things going on, and it is impossible to figure anything out or keep track of it. Hence, the fact that my notes are going to be all over the place when we get to that world title match. And whereas a mid-2000s TNA pay-per-view would comprise of mostly terrible booking and fucked finishes, this show at least had clean finishes and moderately competent booking. It was a very weird show, and one that I'm still stewing on a couple days after the fact. But, I mean, let's get into it and see if we can put some of these puzzle pieces together. And before I delve into the main card, I did want to point out a couple things too. They aired a YouTube show prior to the main card with some prelim matches, which I did not watch. And based on the results I've read, it doesn't seem like I missed a whole lot. Other than seeing Ricky Morton compete in a gauntlet battle royal, which I can only imagine was far from smooth. And the other thing, more importantly, I wanted to touch on was the attendance for the show. The show took place at the GPB studios in Atlanta with limited seating capacity. There were probably not more than 50 people in the crowd, which was pathetically sad. But when you factor in that the GPB studios are government funded, I guess you shouldn't be all that surprised. Fucking 2 years into this goddamn pandemic and we're still doing this bullshit restricted attendance deal. Shit never ends with these people. And honestly, like, maybe the whole attendance thing already put me in a sour mood going in, which kind of made it hard for me to get into the show, but I mean, I look at it this way. If you're going to limit the crowd to under 100 people, you may as well just fucking do an empty arena show. It just looks so low rent when you do this kind of stuff, and no amount of camera placement is going to be enough to cover up for the glaring seat holes. So that whole thing sucked. And it's not even like the seating arrangements made a lick of sense to begin with. You're restricting attendance already, but by doing so, you're blockading off the two extreme rows of seating while everyone's just crammed into the center within 6 feet of each other. Like, if you absolutely had to do the bullshit seating restrictions, you couldn't at least space people out. You couldn't put them in all 3 sections, but maybe have them sit like a few seats apart from each other. At least that way you could have given the visual that it was a fuller house. There's just no logic to any of this shit. And there never has been. And I'm sorry about the whole, swearing tangent about this, but I've been really passionate about this from the very beginning of this pandemic because all these restrictions haven't made a goddamn bit of difference in the grand scheme of things, regardless of anything mainstream media ever tells you. And it was a horrible, horrible period for the professional wrestling business. In fact, it tuned me out for an entire year of 2020 just because I could not enjoy these shows. The whole empty arena, limited seating capacity thing, it just made it virtually impossible to get into anything. And we're still doing this shit. God almighty. I'm going to get off my soapbox with that before I blow a gasket. And we haven't even talked about the card yet. And I know some people are going to take me to task on that, but I don't give a shit at this point. I'm over it. I really am. It's been 2 years. 2 fucking years. Started with 15 days to slow the spread. And I could tell you right from the onset that wasn't going to be a thing. You give them power and control, they'll never take it away. Anyway, our opener was a junior heavyweight title qualifying match between Titus and Austin Aries. Somewhere I have heard that Aries guy is the greatest man who ever lived. I'm trying to figure out where I heard that. And if you have been watching the current NWA product for a while now, and you had any idea that any of the following scenarios were occurring going into the show, raise your hand. A, that the NWA was bringing back the junior heavyweight division. B, that they were holding a tournament to crown a junior heavyweight champion. And C, that Austin Aries was still an active wrestler. In fact, I think the last time I saw that dude was a match he had with Impact Wrestling a few years ago where he did a job in the main event of a pay-per-view and committed the heinous no-sell job of doom and just decided he hated wrestling. And, that whole situation was very unfortunate because I've been an Austin Aries fan for years now. I mean, going back to his early Ring of Honor days in the mid-2000s. And the stuff he did with TNA some odd years ago, I mean, that was some of his best work I had seen in his entire career. One of my favorite periods in TNA history, believe it or not, was right around the period where Aries was getting the big push as the X Division champion. And, they were slowly building him up to win the world title later on. It's one of the best modern character progression pushes I can recall them ever doing in company history. And honestly, not managing to fuck it up in the end. And I'm sure Aries had a lot to do with that. And yeah, I mean, I know his track record. He's kind of a dick. He's kind of a hothead. But, so are most top guys that got big pushes and main event title runs throughout their careers in the business. And while Aries was never the biggest guy in the world, he could talk his ass off, he could wrestle, he could work both sides of the aisle convincingly, and he generally took everything that he was given in the business and made it work. That wasn't until he got to WWE and they fucked him up 6 ways from Sunday, but, what else would you expect out of them? It was a perfectly solid opening pay-per-view match. Like I said, very reminiscent of an old school TNA show or a late 90s WCW pay-per-view where they get the hot opener with the cruiserweight guys doing all the high action, high performance base offense. But both guys look good. They played to the crowd well. I think Aries was supposed to be the heel here, although he did shake Rhett's hand after the match, so maybe he's doing an on-the-fence role right now. I really don't know. And knowing the way Aries does business, I imagine he's probably winning the tournament. Otherwise, I don't really know why he would agree to make his return to wrestling on a studio show in front of a popcorn fart audience. But I guess we'll see what they do. Second match on the show was for the Ring of Honor World Tag Titles. It is Kratos and Aaron Stevens taking on OGK. And I think we already saw OGK work a match on NWA television before. So they might be doing some pay-per-appearance deal right now as they're networking with Ring of Honor. It is going to be very interesting to see how things turn out with ROH following the hiatus period through the end of the year going into, I guess, mid-2022 is what they said. I've kind of been advocating for a while now that Tony Khan would probably benefit from buying the company altogether and sort of using ROH as a developmental platform to prepare some of their greener AEW talent for primetime television. But, when you factor in how the NWA's been linking up with Impact and ROH lately, maybe it's something worth a Billy Corgan investment in the long term. And the NWA roster has been pretty gutted since a lot of their top guys left for WWE and AEW in the last couple years. And while I wouldn't say that ROH's current talent pool is like knocking out home runs at the moment, there are some diamonds in the rough there. The Jay Lethal thing, unfortunately, didn't work out for them, which is kind of disappointing. I thought Lethal would have been a perfect fit for the NWA. And while I've never been a particular fan of them, the Briscoes have been a proven commodity to the business for a long time now, and they do have name power. NWA getting a hold of those guys wouldn't be a bad fit. And of course, you still have guys like EC3 and Kenny King out there too, both of whom can, really cut a promo. Anyway, like I said, this was a cross-promotion match for the ROH tag titles, and much like the opener, I'd say it was pretty solid as far as action goes. Most of the story here revolved around the ongoing and never-ending cycle of whatever in the hell is Aaron Stevens' Kratos tension revolves around. The Kratos-Stevens tag team has been something I've really had a hard time trying to figure out for a while. For the longest time, I thought they were heels. And then it got to a point where Stevens was acting more like a sympathetic babyface, while Kratos was the hard-ass bully trying to pull Stevens out of whatever rut he was going through. And then Kratos started cutting some rock-solid, passionate babyface promos on television, and the people started cheering him, which gave me the impression they were babyfaces. And then I watched this match, and Kratos and Stevens were clearly working as the heels throughout the entirety of the match. So I still have no idea what's going on with that duo, and we're going on some like 3 or 4 months this has been going on. And, the whole thing here was built around Stevens using underhanded tactics and kowtowing to Kratos, egging him on throughout the match. It wasn't bad or anything, but, like I said, this has been going on for so long now, and they're so inconsistent with booking these guys on the TV show. I've just never been able to get a solid footing with the whole storyline. And I don't know. There's something to be said about the complaint of putting the other company over your own talent on your own pay-per-views. That said, with the state of Ring of Honor at this point, I mean, can you really even say it's putting over another talent's roster? I mean, I honestly wouldn't be surprised if OGK ended up jumping ship full-time to the NWA by the end of the year. Like I said, good match. Didn't care for the Stevens Kratos story, but what can you do? Then we had Colby Corino taking on Doug Williams, another former TNA guy that I was a big fan of back in the day. Especially during that period, he was the X Division champion, and honestly, he was one of the very few highlights of that whole god-awful Hogan Bischoff era in the early 2010s. I remember he had a really good match with AJ at one point. God, man, but by now we're talking well over 10 years since I've seen Doug Williams in any major capacity. And I know he wasn't a spring chicken during his TNA run years back. How old is he now? Let me look that up. I'm curious. Doug Williams. The fuck? Apparently there's a football player named Doug Williams. Let's try wrestler. I mean, I guess it is a kind of generic name. He's 49. Wow. And he still wrestles just like he did 10 or so years ago. What a great worker. And this ended up being a hell of a little match. In fact, looking back, probably one of the real highlights of the entire show, which sadly isn't probably saying a whole lot. Colby's doing a thing now where he's coming out with this team known as the Fixers, who I guess are his bodyguards now. And they actually had a clever little angle they were playing up during the match where Colby would send Doug to the outside and the Fixers would tease getting involved, but Colby would tell him to stay back. And it eventually led to the big finish where Doug goes for the Chaos Theory finisher in the corner, but the Fixers get involved. And Colby ends up ramming Doug's shoulder first into the post and then hits a cool-looking cradle pin for the 3. Really solid stuff. My favorite part of the match, actually, was the spot about halfway through where Doug's on the outside and Colby goes to do a running dive, and Doug just decks him with an elbow to the jaw. Looked real sick. But I hope Doug Williams sticks around going forward. I've been a fan of him for a long time. He's always been an incredibly underrated guy and really good worker from what I've seen. And I'd love to see him as a more featured part of the show. I know he's not the youngest guy on the market these days, but I mean, he at least works smart and takes care of himself where it's not like he's at high risk to be putting in the ring at this point. Good match. Up next was Kiera Hogan versus Mickie James for the Impact Knockouts Championship. Of course, fucking Mickey's the Knockouts champion in 2021. Why wouldn't she be? Booking vanity projects for all-female shows where she's the center of attention. Managing to weasel her way into a title reign well past her point of relevancy in the business. She's well in her mission statement at this point to be the female Jeff Jarrett. It was a decent title match, though. I mean, there was some obvious cooperative choreography going on at various points, but that's par for the course in wrestling anymore. It was miles better than the other women's match on the show that we'll talk about. That is for sure. Kiera's still very green, but Mickey's experienced enough now where she was able to carry her well. And a finish saw Kiera go up for the crossbody dive, but Mickie Jarrett rolled through and got the pin. Really not a whole lot much to say about it. I don't follow Impact, so I don't know what's going on with Mickie and her title reign right now. And I think I've mentioned before how Kiera's sort of been like all over the map with the places she's worked for in the year 2021. For the longest time, I thought she was signed to AEW, but then I read somewhere that she was working for Impact. And, I mean, that may have changed recently for all I know, but I mean, for what it's worth, companies are obviously giving her a look, so they must see something in her. Up next was Tyrus taking on Scion for the television title, with the Pope as the special referee for some reason. Not that I'm complaining. I love me some Pope. And within the first 15 seconds of this, before the fucking bell rang for this match, Pope already proved to be a more competent official than every AEW referee combined when he ejected the heels from ringside. Now, of course, that immediately proved to be meaningless when Joe Galli informed us that this match is no DQ. I mean, why wouldn't the heels just run back in anyway? It's not like Pope would be able to do anything about it. We also had the lingering story going into this match as to whether or not the Scion true identity would be revealed by the end of the match. And if you had any doubts that this man was indeed the original spoiler, I would not have called you crazy with that assertion. And I guess the best way I can describe this match would be with the following quote that I wrote down verbatim. I have never seen a street fight match that was filled with plunder and furniture and was such a simultaneously boring and uneventful match. Like, remember how we described the Cody Andrade Atlanta street fight as they hit each other with a bunch of stuff? That was pretty much the same thing they did here, but it was about as dull and lifeless as you could possibly construct a garbage match to be. I don't know if Titus, forgot to fill the gas tank or something before he came out for this match, but he was the perfect epitome of going through the motions here. And I know that Titus already kind of has a bad reputation for being lazy and slow, but this was slow even for a Titus match. There's a point in this where he puts a gimmicked garbage can over Scion, and he goes to drop an elbow on him for a pinfall, and he's yelling at Pope for not counting, despite the fact that Pope was arguing that he couldn't see his shoulders pinned. Meanwhile, Titus is just kind of laying there on the mat for what seems like an eternity, literally doing nothing of value. He was, I don't know, doing his own spin on a rest hold or something. Who fucking knows? There's also a deal where he went to set up 4 chairs so that he could throw Scion onto them a few minutes later, which ended up being a relatively good-looking bump. But there was another instance of, let's needlessly take 10 minutes to set chairs up while Scion just kind of has to lay on the mat and endlessly sell. And, of course, the big thing at the end saw Austin Idol try to get involved by stealing the table from Scion. And as Pope goes to eject him from ringside, the ever-so-wise NWA fans start going, what's he going to do? Disqualify you? Nothing ever gets past a smart mark, right? And in a finish that was purely designed to make the babyfaces look like complete and utter fools, the heels run back out to interfere. Again, why they didn't just do this from the beginning of the match, who knows? But Pope gets fed up with all the heel antics, so he starts unleashing on Titus with punches, backs him into the corner where Scion was, and as Titus is resting in the corner with Scion pinned behind him, Pope, I guess, forgot that Scion was behind Titus, and Pope goes to give Titus the running knees, but Titus dodges it. Pope inadvertently takes out Scion, which, I mean, even if he would have connected the knees with Titus, Scion still would have felt the brunt of the impact. Christ, it would have been worse because he'd have 2 fucking big guys barreling into him at full force. So in fact, Titus may have done Scion a favor by getting out of the way and letting Pope hit him with the running knees. But the whole deal there was Pope accidentally hitting Scion, Titus decks Scion with a punch to the chest, and Pope reluctantly counts to 3, and yay heel heat. And I guess they're going to delay Pope's world title match even longer by having him go after Titus and the TV belt in the short term, which I guess I don't have a problem with, but I was kind of looking forward to him working a program with Trevor down the road. But yeah, this match didn't work. And aside from the sheer boredom of having to sit through it, the booking was all over the place. And anytime the payoff is the babyface is made to look like an idiot, it's always a bad sign. Then we get the ultimate highlight of the program. It's Mrs. Foley's baby boy, Mick Foley, out to do a promo. And somewhere I read on a results page that someone interpreted this as Mick Foley deciding to pick up a quick payday here just so he had a reason to come out dressed as Santa. Which at this point would not be all that shocking to me. But he did a quick spiel about being back for the first time in 30 years. Talked about the story of him doing the big infamous elbow drop off the apron to the concrete that put him on the map with a lot of the boys in the back. Said he's proud to be part of a company with some familiar and new faces. Says he's going to be scouting the remainder of the show for any more booking quirks. And if things started to run off the tracks, he was going to get involved. In other words, Mick was letting us know ahead of time that we can expect something screwy to go down in the main event, which, unsurprisingly, is exactly what happened. And, of course, it's Mick, so, he always has that awkward charm to make him great, but it was a good promo. But, we got the usual Foley cliches in here, and, of course, it gets the biggest ovation of the entire night, bar none. We had Judas taking on Adonis for the National Heavyweight title. Speaking of boring, pop quiz. What do you get when you pair one lumbering, boring pro wrestler with 2 left feet against another lumbering, boring pro wrestler with 2 left feet? If you answered a very lumbering, boring pro wrestling match, you'd be correct. Actually, here's something interesting. A little bit of trivia for you. Since we spent a good chunk of the show referencing old TNA moments from a decade or so ago, I ended up doing some research on this Judas guy. And he indeed was part of TNA during the infamous Hogan Bischoff era. Y'all remember the 2 security goons, Gunner and Murphy? The knockoff Harris Brothers gimmick from Nitro? Gunner, who actually ended up going on to get a bit of a push in TNA and wound up finding himself in WWE as part of the ill-famed Forgotten Sons faction. As it turns out, Judas was the former Murphy, who they thought of so fondly that his last match in the company was a random match on television where he lost, got kicked out of the Immortal faction, and I guess got fired soon thereafter because we never saw him again. And not only did I have zero recollection of the fact that Murphy was ever a thing in TNA, the fact that he was so unmemorable and forgettable when he showed up in the NWA with James Mitchell, I just figured he was just another generic big indie guy. And, not to harp on it too much, but, whether he goes by Murphy or whether he goes by Judas, he still sucks. I wrote down virtually nothing about this match. The only thing of note I got out of it was the finish where Judas went up top for a diving clothesline and looked to have legitimately tweaked his hamstring on the landing, which takes a real level of skill and suctitude to blow out your hamstring by attempting a diving clothesline, but Judas may have managed it. Unless he was selling, which, he could have been, but it's not like people would have sympathized for him either way. Up next was La Rebellion versus the End for the NWA tag titles. Speaking of forgetting things from earlier, am I the only one that completely forgot that La Rebellion were the NWA tag champions? Not that they're a bad team or anything, I just don't remember ever seeing them on television. I completely diverted them from memory. So let me get this straight, because I want to make sure I'm getting my timeline right here. They constructed a months-long tournament to crown number 1 contenders for the tag titles, utilized just about every team they had at their disposal, went through a month stretch where the champs were just MIA from TV altogether, just to get to this point and have the champions retain anyway? All right, then. It was a good match. Nothing blow away or remarkable, but it was fine. The End have been a solid heel team, and I remember Pero actually cut a relatively decent promo a couple weeks back on the show. Just didn't seem like there was a lot of intrigue going into this, and I think it kind of reflected with the way the crowd responded. Things obviously picked up toward the end once they started implementing the AEW formula of everyone just get your shit in spots. And I mean, I can nitpick it and talk about how incompetent it makes the ref look until I'm blue in the face, but I mean, at some point you got to just throw your hands up and say, fuck it, it's not going to change. But after La Rebellion won with Mecha Wolf hitting the 450 splash on Pero, we had JTG come out with Dan Fango or Dirty Dingo or the former Fandango. And I guess him and JTG are going after the straps next. Okay, then. Then we get this Tom Latimer, Nick Aldis grudge match. And before we get into the logistics of this, I did want to point out the video package they aired beforehand. I thought that was really well done. It's cool, looking through the still images of them back in TNA years ago and kind of seeing how they've been attached at the hip over the course of their career by coming up in the business, training together. Here's the best way I think I could sum this match up. They tried a lot of different things, and I don't think they ever figured out exactly how to settle on what kind of match they wanted to have. And I know that seems like a mouthful, but I really don't know any other way to describe it. There were elements of classic 80s NWA in there, but there were also a lot of angles they did. And a lot of them felt like they just happened in rapid succession without ever having any room to breathe. It's like they started with Tom using stalling tactics on the outside with Aldis in hot pursuit, and less than a minute after that, Tom started challenging Aldis on the fact that he could out-wrestle him. So then they started doing basic chain wrestling for a while. And not too long after that, they're doing the old Ric Flair deal where Tom tries to crawl out of the ring, but Aldis exposes his bare ass, which basically ended up turning this into a comedy match for a few minutes. And then not long after they do that, Tom's going on the outside and threatening to DQ himself by using a ring hammer on Aldis, and it's like I said, they did a lot of different angles here, but I don't think it's synchronized within the entire scope of the match. The other problem I think I had with it is that given the gravity of the story they were playing up, it really felt that they were going out of their way to build this as a high-profile grudge match. And I just don't think it ever reached a level of intensity that it should have. When I think of grudge matches, I think of hard-hitting fights. I think of double juice jobs. I think of two guys beating each other so bad they'd be lucky to walk out of the ring on their own feet. This was essentially two guys working a straight wrestling match. It was fine. It was a good pro wrestling contest, but certainly didn't resemble anything close to a blood feud. And that's kind of disappointing because this was the one match on the show that I was really looking forward to going in. And it ended up kind of being a letdown by the end. Especially seeing Aldis beat Tom with a jackknife flash pin from basically out of nowhere. It kind of reminded me of that Hunter HBK Street fight when Sean came back from back surgery and he and Hunter are having that bloodbath street fight back and forth for like 20 plus minutes. And the finish is Sean rolling up Hunter with a jackknife cradle and pinning him. Just felt so random and out of place in that kind of environment. And this was something real similar, although not quite on the level of the Hunter-Sean match. I presume the feud will continue in some manner, but considering what they were billing this as going in, I thought it left a lot to be desired. Following this, we had the special tribute to Jazz, the former NWA Women's Champion with a reign that lasted well over 900 days. I believe she held the belt from 2016 all the way up until... Oh man, I forget when she vacated the belt. Must have been shortly before they launched NWA Power in late 2019. It was good to see Jazz back. I know she's been through some health problems in the last few years, but it's good to see she's doing well and she's still an active part of the business today. I remember watching her as far back as the early runs in WWF in the early 2000s. And I'll tell you something. Y'all can rave about Jade Cargill being that bitch. Jazz was that bad bitch before bad bitch was even a thing. For all y'all old school WWE fans that were always pumping up Gail Kim's overrated ass back around that 2002-2003 time frame, I was all about watching Jazz smash chicks like Trish and Lita on Raw. You want to talk about legitimate female talent that I wouldn't be caught dead fucking with in an alleyway? Put Jazz at the top of that list. She's certainly more intimidating than Kelly. But, joking aside, someone I think who is criminally underrated as a female talent in the business, especially when she was in her prime. And I guess a lot of that has to do with wrong place, wrong time for where she was in WWE and kind of where they were marketing the women's division at that point. Obviously, I think her coming up the pike with girls like Trish and Lita didn't do her any favors. You could always tell the creative value Trish and Lita more at the time. And the other thing, too, with Jazz is she was plagued with a lot of injuries around that time, too, which kind of made it hard for creative to be consistent with her booking. So it's a laundry list of things, but, she was a real talent. And apparently Jazz is going to be a road agent going forward, so she's going to be overseeing some of the decision-making of the women's matches in the NWA. And to that I can say, as long as she does not sign off on any more social distance matches, I'm good with that. And I will concede that I cannot confirm whether or not Jazz had any influence in the booking of the semi-main with Camille taking on Melina for the NWA Women's World title. If she did, she's not off to a hot start. And I know I mentioned a few times that, the build to this was relatively good on the TV show, and it probably could have turned out to be a decent title match by the end. While I'm certainly right about a lot of things when it comes to wrestling, this was not one of them. This was really bad. And truthfully, I don't really even know if I can single out either girl for being in the wrong here. Because I remember I saw Melina have a really good match with Deonna Purrazzo earlier this year. And, while Camille isn't Ric Flair or anything like that, I've seen much better matches with her in the last year or so. This just didn't click. The only credit I can really give him is that they seemed to get on a better page together as the match went along, but by that point, we were well past the halfway mark. And I know I'd been saying, if Camille is going to eventually drop the strap, Melina would probably be the ideal candidate to do that with. After having watched the way this match went down, I'm glad they didn't do the title switch. For whatever reason, the chemistry never clicked with either girl here, and whether that was Camille having an off night or Melina getting the performance butterflies, I really don't know. I'm not going to spend much longer talking about it, but it's like I mentioned at the top of the discussion. A lot of this stuff early on in the show was relatively good when it came to action, but starting with that television title match and pretty much carrying through the national heavyweight title match, the Aldis Latimer match, the semi-main, and the main, this show really kind of fell off the map in terms of quality ring work in a multitude of ways. And, whereas in the previous match, I chalked most of my problems up to the fact that I just didn't really care for the particular story of the Aldis Latimer match, this was just purely bad wrestling. Really, there's no way to put it. And that brings us to our main event. It's Trevor Murdoch defending the NWA World title against Mike Knox. The highlight of the entire match, by far the biggest pop of the night for me, the referee Jared Fritz is going over the rules of the title match, and he concludes by asking if either man has any questions, to which a mark in the crowd blurts out the following question: "Why is your hair in a bun?" I cannot tell you how hard and for how long I laughed at this. It had to have been a good 5 minutes before I ended up regaining my composure. That might have been the hardest I've laughed watching anything in wrestling the entire year, and there was absolutely no reason for that to be as funny as it was. I think I talked about the whole Mike Knox thing when he first showed up to attack Trevor in the cage. I was never impressed with anything I've ever seen out of Knox, even from WWE years ago, and after having watched him work with Trevor here, my opinion really hasn't changed on that. They had, exactly as my notes read here, a relatively passable TV main event match. The problem is that this was on pay-per-view that I ended up paying $25 to see a replay of, watching it on Sunday morning on Fight TV. And for me, a passable TV quality match is not worth a $25 fee. And again, the booking and the decision-making in the world title scene seems all over the place right now. First, it looked like they were going in the direction of having Pope challenge Trevor for the title. Then they started going in the direction of pushing Jax Dane to challenge Trevor. Now it looks like Pope's going to feud with Titus over the TV belt. And I think Dane's still infused with his feud with Crimson. And, the whole Mike Knox thing came so out of left field. I really never even had much of a chance to digest it on television before we even got to this point. And I can accept it as like a placeholder title program to give Trevor an easy title win. But even by that logic, you couldn't have found someone more qualified than Mike Knox of all people. No offense to the guy. Sure, he's a great guy. But the wrestling pool right now has a lot of unsigned, uncontracted indie talent, many of whom are fresh out of WWE within the year. I mean, and I know guys like Keith Lee and Killer Kross are still dealing with the whole 90-day no-compete clause. But even bringing in a guy like Braun Strowman or, what was his name? The former NXT guy, Bronson Reed. There are plenty of more qualified big guys who are more skilled if you wanted to do the powerhouse versus powerhouse story. And again, that's not even really speaking to the real absurdity of the whole main event segment. What the fuck was with this Vince Russo as shit at the end? Okay, so first, after Trevor pins Knox clean in the middle of the ring with a top rope bulldog, Matt Cardona comes out to, I think, shake Trevor's hand, but Trevor gets all pissed because Cardona's stealing his spotlight, even though I don't think that was Cardona's initial intent. And then Knox low blows Trevor from behind, which leads Mick Foley to come out to say, no, hang on, that's not how we do things here in the NWA. So apparently Mick Foley's a booker now in the NWA. So Foley attempts to send some backup to help Trevor out, keyword being attempt, and outruns Pope to get the jump on the heels, but within a matter of seconds, Pope gets thwarted and laid out like a total geek, so that is twice on the same show that Pope was made to look like a complete fucking Nimrod. He must have pissed in someone's Cheerios, because I have no other way to account for the way Pope got treated on this show. And after Cardona throws Pope into the steps, he gets into the ring to pose with the NWA World title, all the while signaling that he and Mike Knox are secretly aligned. Or something. So Cardona is going to be a heel now? So the whole thing with him coming out to confront Trevor for the handshake was a swerve? And I don't follow or watch Garbage Championship Wrestling, GCW, whatever the company's called. I know Cardona's made sort of an impact on that show since his WWE release, and good for him, I guess. I don't think his particular style of wrestling fits the NWA mold, and I can only hope that he doesn't try to bring that GCW style to the NWA. I mean, again, it's the same case I made with the Mike Knox thing. It feels totally random, totally out of left field, and honestly just more of a stalling tactic to keep Pope and Jax away from the NWA title, which I really don't understand. I mean, I get teasing something and holding off on it for a later date to get the people really wanting to see it, but there's also something to be said about holding off on something for so long that it gets to a shit or get off the pot scenario. Right now, we're kind of edging closer in that direction. I don't really see what they have to gain out of a Matt Cardona, Trevor Murdoch program unless it's just another placeholder title match for Trevor to go over clean. And even by that same token, again, you can't find someone more qualified than Matt Cardona. So we'll see where it goes, but that whole final match in Afterbirth really put a damper on the conclusion of the show for me. And like I said, man, the first several matches on the show were pretty good, but starting with that television title match around the midway point of the pay-per-view, this show really fell into a downward spiral that it never climbed out from. It is promising to see some new talent getting some attention, especially some of these Ring of Honor guys that are coming into the fold. Like I mentioned, the Jay Lethal thing is kind of unfortunate, what with him signing with AEW. I think he could have been a great fit for the NWA, but things didn't work out. But if they can latch onto a team like the Briscoes and, try to bring in a couple more top-level names to fill that main event role, NWA could have some really solid groundwork going into 2022. The Mike Knox, Matt Cardona thing isn't really going to do a whole lot for me, but as a short-term program, it can serve its purpose. I'm sure the end goal is to eventually get to the Pope and Trevor title match, and same with the Jax Dane Trevor title match, but the way they're getting to it is just rubbing me the wrong way. And as noted from the beginning of the show, my Chairshot article from this past week is still in pending mode on the site right now, so it is unavailable for viewing. If it's not published in the next couple days, I might shoot out an email to see what the holdup is. Usually if it's labeled with scheduled, it means it's on its way to being published at a later point in the day, but because I didn't get around to submitting it until later in the week, there's probably a delay in the actual publishing process. So no article analysis today. I'll go ahead and hold off until next Monday to do that. Hopefully the article will be out by that point so we can talk about it. That one's my bad. Like I said, normally I write my articles early in the week so they can sit for a few days before I dive into reading them, and gives people a chance to give the article a look over before we actually talk about it. Things have been kind of hectic for me this past week, so some things got put on the back burner in the short term. But again, guys, if you want to support my content going forward, make sure you subscribe, comment, and rate the show. We'll be back on Friday for the Dynamite Report and the continuation of our Retro Review series. Until then, take care.